Hi, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us. We're going to get started in just a moment here while we let some more folks trickle in, so stick around. If you're just joining us, welcome. We're going to get things started in a moment here, so hang tight. And just a quick note, we are also streaming this panel on Facebook, so you can head on over to TechSoup Global in your Facebook page, and you can also tune in live there. You can share it with anyone else who'd like to watch. We will be taking questions there as well. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So hello and welcome to our virtual event series, Building Communities Through Online Organizing. I'm Nicole Jones and I'll be your host. So I think it goes without saying right now that we are living in unprecedented times. And now more than ever, our communities depend on nonprofits to connect us to critical services and policymakers during a crisis. How we organize online now will have an impact on future generations to come. But we don't have to go it alone. We're learning together with this virtual event series about tools, tactics, and best practices for online organizing. If you missed our first session, don't worry. We're going to share the recordings of all of our sessions today with you via email in the next day or two. And we're now in our second session, Women in Civic Tech, How Voices of Women Help Us Advance Democracy. And we're going to end our day with an online community organizing workshop for nonprofits, and that starts at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time. However, registration is closed for this. We want to make sure it's an intimate group and that there's lots of peer-to-peer FaceTime. So we have closed registration to keep the numbers manageable. So if you signed up already and you received an approval in your email confirmation note, then you're good to go, but still you want to make sure that you show up on time because it is first come, first serve. So show up if you signed up already at 12:30 p.m. And if you can't attend for some reason, if you can just go to your confirmation email and make sure to just cancel that so we can give a spot to someone else, that would be much appreciated. And you can learn more about this entire online organizing event series by heading on over to our blog. We're going to drop that link in the chat here, along with other links along the way, so you can see the connection between all these events and also get to learn more about our speakers. Okay, now on to some housekeeping. So we're using Zoom for all three of our sessions today. And this session is being recorded in entirety, and it's going to be shared with you via email. Anyone who registered within a day or two, business day, I should say, of this webinar. You're also going to receive slides and any resources that are mentioned in your email as well. A couple other things to note. So all lines are muted, but you'll be able to ask questions at any time by typing them into the Q&A panel of your Zoom window. And we love your questions. So anytime that question pops up into your head, go ahead and drop it into Q&A, and we'll take some time at the very end to answer those. And the comments, the chat box is a really great place to share reactions and resources to what you're hearing today. So please go ahead and use it, starting to answer with this question of what brought you here today to this session about women in civic tech. Let us know in the comments and we will try to read some later on in this session. So this event is brought to you by TechSoup, the global network bridging tech solutions and services for good. You may know TechSoup for its software program, but we're much more than that. We also provide support, training, community, and more to help more than 1 million nonprofits in over 200 countries and territories around the world. Okay, so before we introduce our panelists here today, we're gonna go ahead and do a quick poll here. All right, let me get this launched. So we want to know which best describes you, and you're going to see a couple options pop up here on your screen. So which best describes you? Do you work at a tech company? Do you work at GovTech or Civic Tech? Do you work at a nonprofit organization? Are you a freelancer interested in tech for good? Or if it's other, go ahead and let us know in the chat. All right, so we're just going to give you a few more moments to let those responses pile in. But so far, overwhelmingly, we have 84% of you saying that you work at a nonprofit organization. 7% are saying other, so we'll check out the chat and see what best describes you. And then about 4% saying you work in GovTech, Civic Tech, and 4% saying you are a freelancer interested in tech for good. So I'm gonna go ahead and share those results out. So there we have it. So we've got a lot of nonprofit friends with us here today. It's great to have you here. Thanks for being part of this session. Okay, and now on to introductions for today's panel. So joining us, we have Sarah Rozier. She is Director of Strategic Partnerships at Ballotpedia. Sarah joined the staff in 2013 to direct the Congress project. She then became federal desk editor and transitioned to news editor in 2017. And previously, she worked in development for a grassroots organization on Capitol Hill. And we also have Jill Brownfield. She's partner support manager at Democracy Works and is a civic engagement nerd who is passionate about the intersection of technology and social good. In her current role at Democracy Works, she helps get critical voter participation tech to millions of US voters through cross-sector partnerships. And we're also joined by Veronica Young, Senior Program Manager at Brigade Network at Code for America. And prior to joining Code for America, Veronica dedicated her career to social and political activism, serving on the political campaigns and working in support of them. She served on Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign and worked as a consultant in Washington, D.C., specializing in voter engagement, and got her political start as a field organizer for President Obama's 2012 re-election campaign. And our moderator for today's discussion is the fabulous Amar D. Prasad. She's interim director for the City of San Francisco's Office of Civic Innovation, and Dee has dedicated her career to fostering cross-sector partnerships, believing fundamentally that in order to improve cities and communities, we need to work across silos and sectors. Welcome to each of you, and thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to pass the baton to you, Dee.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I hope you're all staying well. I thought we would start the panel by getting to know our panelists a little bit more. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jill to share a little bit more about her work and her organization. So Jill?
Thank you so much, Nicole and Dee, and good morning from Los Angeles, everyone. My name is Jill Brownfield, and I work on strategic partnerships at Democracy Works. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that builds technology to simplify and modernize the voting process. So I'm very excited to be here with you all today. So a little bit about us. As many of you may know, voter participation in the US is critically low, especially at the local level, and 60% of non-voters don't vote because of process issues. We also know that there are folks who are underrepresented in the electorate or have been historically disenfranchised by our country's voting processes because those process issues and barriers disproportionately affect them. So in a year like 2020, our mission is even more urgent in many ways as we see the election landscape rapidly changing due to the pandemic. So today I'm going to discuss two of our tools that are designed to help people overcome process barriers and become active voters: TurboVote and How to Vote. Next slide, please. Great, so let's start with TurboVote, which is a tool that helps users navigate the voter registration and mail-in voting processes, and then stays in touch with users over time through election reminders via SMS or email. Around 7 million users receive TurboVote's election reminders, and they can reply to any text or email from us and get in touch with our fully staffed help desk. When a user arrives at TurboVote, and you can visit turbovote.org, we ask them for a few basic details, including their name, contact information, and address. And then we provide state-specific instructions for voter registration and either connect users to their state's official online voter registration portal or help them pre-fill and return a paper form. We also assist users with mail-in or absentee requests for each of their elections, which will be obviously a big part of the election in November this year. And then after they sign up, users will receive reminders to ensure that they have the information they need to cast their ballots for every election. Any institution or community group is welcome to promote turbovote.org to their audience. And then organizations looking for more support or customization should consider our formal partnerships program, where we work with hundreds of colleges and universities, nonprofit organizations, and companies. Next slide, please. Here are a few examples of our technology out there with our partners. For each partner, we set up a customizable TurboVote site and provide them with metrics and analytics so they can track the effectiveness of their voter engagement work. Each of our partners works with a dedicated member of the Democracy Work staff, sometimes me, to advise them on best practices and support in their use of our technology. So now I'm going to talk about another tool that we offer really quick called How to Vote. So next slide, please. Thank you. So our How to Vote project is essentially a state-by-state summary of voter registration and voting rules for all 50 states and the District of Columbia. And it doesn't require any kind of sign up like TurboVote, though a lot of the information in each of the tools is the same. So if you're curious if your state offers online voter registration, or you need to know how to request a ballot by mail, we've got you covered with detailed information about your options. We also link out to official state resources and reputable third parties like Ballotpedia for more information. And this resource is split into 2 different sections for each state. So there's how to register and how to vote. And all of the pages are available in English and Spanish. So the How to Register guide helps people review all their options, from online voter registration to paper and in-person options, and it's tailored to every state's unique rules, requirements, and deadlines. And we also provide information there about overseas voting and voting rights. And then the How to Vote page are especially valuable this year because voting isn't just going to be going to the polls on election day. Options like early voting, mail-in and absentee voting, and ballot drop boxes are available to more voters this year, and they're growing in popularity in lieu of the pandemic. And so our How to Vote guides help users understand what their options are for casting a ballot and help them decide when and where to vote. So we also link out to Ballotpedia there so folks can get information about their ballot. And I'll go to the next slide. Yeah, that's all for me. If you want to hear more, you can contact us at partnerships@democracyworks or me at jill@democracy.works. But I'll pass it back to you, Dee. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill, for sharing such insightful options for folks, which are so timely. And if you are looking for information, I saw a little bit in the chat, we'll be sharing all of the links and resources with you. So definitely check them out. I'm now going to move on and introduce Sarah again to come in and share a little bit more about her role and about Ballotpedia, which Jill so kindly introduced a little bit in her work. Sarah?
Yeah, thanks, Dee. Thanks. Nice to see everybody virtually. And yeah, like Jill said, the first step, register to vote. We love TurboVote. We're always appreciative of the work that they're doing. And then after you register, what happens next? So our goal is to make sure that people aren't just voting, but that they're becoming informed voters. And so we're always thankful when our partners are willing to share some of our resources too. So Ballotpedia, we are a nonprofit 501c3. We're based out of Wisconsin, but we're built for this pandemic, one could say, because we're all spread across the country as we're doing our work at the different levels of government and making sure that we have the people, policies, and elections covered from federal all the way down to school board and cities, which I'll talk about in a second. So we
our goal is to be the Encyclopedia of American Politics. And next slide. And so, like I mentioned, we cover the people, places, and things related to elections from federal, presidential, all the way down to the top 100 cities by population and top 200 school boards by student enrollment. Within that, we're covering all the candidate lists as candidates file for runs to office. We're tracking some types of litigation, some types of legislation. We recently did a big COVID reopening plan project, and we're tracking just everything that's related to how to vote, what it looks like, voter ID laws, anything that could come up when you're talking about how to become an engaged citizen in this country. We were started, as kind of the name of this panel alludes to, we are female founded and run, and we're really excited to be a part of this specific conversation, just as we talk about the barriers to becoming informed voters. And of course, the name Ballotpedia, our bread and butter is ballot measures. So within our scope, we cover all statewide ballot measures and then every single California ballot measure, even at the local level in that state. As you guys may know, many of you are in California right now, there are a lot of them. So any statewide ballot measure that may come across your ballot, we're going to have very granular information, a simple yes, no, here's what it means to vote for or against this statewide ballot measure, and other information there. So we are just intending to be kind of a level-headed, neutral voice in the room to give you as much information on these candidates and everything else that's on your ballot this November. So next slide. So to do that, our capstone offering is our sample ballot, which is a free tool that we offer any voter to type in their address and then see within the scope that I just mentioned, an overview on what's on their ballot for the year. We've also this year launched our My Vote Engage app, which you can pull up in your app store right now. And it gives users a very clean and simple way to go on, use their address, and indicate who they're planning on voting for, or ballot measure wise, what they're planning on voting for in those circumstances. Next slide. So in addition to our sample ballot tool, we're hoping to reach over 1/4 of all voters in 2020. We also have a few other innovations and offerings that might be helpful to you or your organization. And as always, feel free to reach out directly to me if you have any questions. One thing we're really proud about is trying to level the playing field for all candidates as well. So we allow candidates through our candidate connection to have the ability to submit all of their information, the main themes of their campaign, the main issues they're standing on, and then to answer a very neutral, basic candidate survey that we would then include on their Ballotpedia profile. A lot of times these are first-time candidates, especially in this cycle. We're seeing a lot of new people running, and we want to make sure that they have the ability to get the information about their campaign out there as much as possible. So we offer that. We offer a online debate platform that's especially exciting this cycle since there aren't too many in-person town halls this year, as we all know. And then we just do a whole bunch of newsletters. If you want to get a daily update of 5 items a day on what's happening in the world of politics, we offer a daily email, a weekly email, and then very targeted specific ones. Additionally, we have our API, which has the full force of Ballotpedia data backing it. And we're happy to work with whatever needs you or your companies may need this November. So that's my spiel about Ballotpedia, and I'll turn it back over to Dee.
Thank you, Sarah. That is the good work. There's a lot there, and I hope if you haven't checked out those resources that you take a moment to do so. A lot of really great information. And last but not least, I'd love to introduce Veronica, who can share a little bit more about her work at Brigade and Code for America and her role. Veronica?
Great, thank you, Dee. Thank you, Nicole, for having me. So hello, everyone. My name is Veronica Young. I am a Senior Program Manager for the Brigade Network at Code for America. Next slide, please. And next slide, those are just some pictures of our Brigade Network. So a little bit about Code for America. We can get into the next slide. So Code for America uses the principles and practices of the digital age to improve how government serves the American public and how the public improves government. Next slide, please. And the question is, how do we get there? So our ideal is that government services are simple, effective, and easy to use, and that we work at scale to build healthy, prosperous, and safe communities. So the work that we do is really in various aspects of our kind of civic system, whether that's in the criminal justice space, the social safety net space, the EITC space, which has to do with helping folks get their refunds during tax season. And then we have a Brigade Network that essentially works in our individual communities in all of these different areas. So a little bit more, next slide, please. So we're a network of people who believe that government can work for the people, by the people in the digital age. And our goal is that a 21st century government effectively and equitably serves all Americans. Next slide. So the Brigade Network, as I mentioned, is our network of community organizers and technologists who essentially use these principles and practices in their local communities to build tools for their local governments and for local nonprofits in order to help people access either government services or various areas of need in their communities. So we have a network of over 80 Brigade chapters across the country, and each of those chapters works with local government and with local nonprofits to create technological tools in order to do that. Next slide, please. So this year we decided on 4 priority action areas that we really wanted to focus on in terms of what areas of government and what areas of our communities and systems we really wanted to increase our impact in as a Brigade Network. Next slide, please. And those 4 areas are in rapid response. So we had done quite a bit of work with hurricane response across the country as hurricanes had come up, and providing people resources to essentially respond in those time periods, whether that was accessing food, accessing shelter. And this year we really expanded upon that work to help people access resources in response to COVID-19. We also were focusing in creating pathways to record clearance. So one of Code for America's program is called Clear My Record, and we do the technology behind automatic record clearance in states and counties across the country. And so various local chapters are also working on local tools to help with the record clearance process. Then we also wanted to focus on voting rights, given that this is a big election year, making sure that everyone had the access they needed to be able to cast their ballots. And lastly, in court notification, so really updating the court notification process. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about voting rights, which is the reason we're all here today, or at least the voting and election system. There are projects that exist in the Brigade Network to give people helpful information about the voting process. So for example, Open Oakland, which is our Brigade chapter in Oakland, has a platform called Open Disclosure, in which you can find out more information about the funding and campaign finance sources of local candidates, as well as Open Maine's Maine ballot, which gives information about ballot initiatives in Maine. So these are projects that focus on access to information, and there are many of these types of projects across the country that really help our local communities find information about their election systems and voting systems. Next slide, please. We've engaged in a couple of partnerships over the last year to be able to help get this information to people across the country. So essentially, we see ourselves as having unique skills, particularly in the technological space, for folks to be able to to contribute those skills to partner organizations that are doing this work. So we engaged with vote.org, where a group of volunteers essentially conducted research to make sure that the information that was going out to people on vote.org was accurate and up to date, particularly in response to COVID-19. And vote.org is essentially a site that you can go to find out information about how to register to vote, to find information on your polling locations, and how to effectively go through the voting process easily. Next slide, please. And last year, we also engaged in a partnership with Color of Change, who essentially has a repository of information about district attorneys. They also have a set of standards in which they believe that district attorneys should live up to in their campaign promises, in order to help work against some of the systematic racism that the criminal justice system has embraced throughout our country's history. And so we worked to help provide information that was going into their directory. Next slide, please. And just to be able to continue this work, we have a National Day of Civic Hacking coming up on September 12th. And there's a link here in which you can find more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you all for sharing some really great insights about the work. It's very much a 360 of the sphere. And so all of your viewpoints are so unique in that way. Moving on and maybe getting to know you all a little bit more. Veronica, maybe we can start with you, and then Sarah and Jill, you guys can follow. But what motivated you to get involved in civic tech specifically? What was sort of that moment for you, and how did that journey come about?
Sure. Thanks for that question. So I had my start working in the partisan political realm, working on campaigns and elections. And I really got the opportunity to look at Code for America, which is an organization that I had followed for a while, and think about how do we expand some of the impact that I wanted to have in this space. So I was very energized by the work that I was doing in the partisan political space, but also there are various areas of government where folks need help getting access to those systems. And so taking a little bit of a broader view was something that was important for me in order to have a different impact in the work that I was able to do.
Great, thank you. Sarah, do you want to share a little bit more about how you came into the civic tech space?
Yeah, so similar to Veronica, I also came from a pretty partisan background and became quickly allergic to it. So I discovered Ballotpedia this was now nearly a decade ago, just through my own undergrad studies and then the work that I was doing, and realized, hey, this is a neutral, concise source. I want to be a part of this. So I came on, really learned the editorial ropes and how we take neutrality seriously, our goals through every word that we write on the site, every piece of data that gets put into our database, through the editorial team working on the federal content, and then crafting our newsletters. And then I've just kind of grown and expanded with the company, and we realized there was a need for different pipelines for Ballotpedia data. So often working with our fellow tech companies and making sure that their users have the information they need, and some of our research partners too, and just trying to get, again, that neutral source out there as much as possible.
Yeah, interesting, similar paths in that way. What about you, Jill?
Yeah, I think a lot about kind of how my early career and, getting involved as an organizer as a young adult and being raised by civically engaged women really shaped me early in life. My grandma is still a poll worker for every election, including the primary that happened in Florida a couple of weeks ago. And I also volunteered with AmeriCorps for a year after college, and really got firsthand experience with how our systems fail people regularly, either by design or not by design. And then after my time with AmeriCorps, I moved out to California and got involved in technology, and then, found out about the role that Democracy Works and applied, and I honestly didn't even know that civic tech was an option at that point. And so imagine my surprise when I found that these two kind of things I thought were maybe not mutually exclusive, but I had to have both, not just one or the other. And it kind of merges two of my periods of time in my career.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. I always find it helpful to sort of understand the journey. Speaking of sort of neutral spaces in civic tech, when you all look across the civic tech ecosystem, which has grown significantly, I think, than from when we all started in this space, what bright spots or successful examples really stand out to you? What types of innovations do you think are showing real results for folks in the room that are maybe thinking about, starting something or wanting to look at bright spots? Where would you maybe point them? And maybe Jill, can we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I immediately think of our partners. We have, hundreds of partners in the higher ed, the nonprofit, and even companies that we work with. And our collaboration with them is really focused on giving them ownership over their voter engagement initiatives. And so I always see these great places where the TurboVote technology is popping up, and I'm like, that is so creative. One example, we partner with the Louisiana State University, and they created QR codes for their custom TurboVote link and shared them with members of their student community. And then those QR codes started popping up recently at local Black Lives Matter protests, at other community events. And so kind of building up those networks and empowering those partners really pays off at the local level, because we know our partners know their communities best. And so that's one kind of bright spot that I always think about. Another one is, I always like to lift up my research team, my organization's research team, when I think about bright spots. This year is obviously hugely challenging because there's a number of data points that we're collecting on top of our kind of normal election data. And things are changing at the last minute. So I also think of my research team's commitment to collecting all that data and getting it out to voters. So those are what I was thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Veronica, what about from your perspective? What stands out to you in terms of bright spots?
Sure. Well, I'll just put in a shameless plug for our Brigade Network. Our chapters are all volunteer run and led, and the projects that come out of these civic engagement volunteer projects are absolutely incredible. People are creating these very useful tools in their communities for folks to be able to access some very basic needs, whether that's food, whether that's eviction protection, whether that's helping people get healthcare in crisis during COVID-19. The impacts that these projects are having in our communities are really incredible. And so I think that for me, the bright spot is the power of community and power of people's passions really being able to take hold and serve their communities in a very mutual and respectful way. Code for America really prioritizes user-centered design and the user research process in order to create tools that are equitable and that actually come from users' needs. And so I think that being able to employ these systems along with the passion and talent of volunteers across the country is something that's really special, and I think really shows the power of community that so many people embrace in various different ways, and this is one way that shows that.
Yeah, I think that the collaborative muscle is very, very strong. Sarah, what are some of the things that stand out to you?
Yeah, so in addition to just kind of being able to see the different roles that all of these organizations are playing and making sure that people have the information they need, one thing that's been very helpful and really encouraging to see is the general thought we all have of what are the voids we need to be filling. So for Ballotpedia, one thing we noticed going back a few years now is the news deserts that are popping up across the country. It used to be that even when I was a little kid in the 90s, I could open the newspaper around election time, and I would, because obviously we're all kind of civic nerds here, but I would open up the newspaper and be able to see information about my local school board candidates, about my local state legislative race. And now there isn't a local newspaper. So where do people go for that information to a source that they can trust? You know, a lot of the former institutions that we think of in this space who would put out candidate surveys and put out a full official survey to each candidate, sometimes there's trust issues associated with them. So filling that void of creating a place for this information to go, but then also a place that's trusted, and then really thinking through the next decade is really inspiring to me. So right now, one of our biggest problems we're trying to solve at Ballotpedia, and I won't get too nerdy, I promise, but it's the issue of how do you determine what ballot you get? So we call it the election mapping issue. If I'm in a specific county commissioner district plus a specific state legislative district plus a specific local dog catcher race, how does the county elections administrator know in a very technologically based way exactly who gets what ballot? And so that's one thing we're thinking through really fully to try to be able to solve the problem, to be able to get everybody in the country a universal sample ballot that has the elections and candidates all the way from the top completely down to the bottom, which is over 650,000 elected officials. So all of those things put together, the progress that's been made just in the last decade is just so inspiring.
Yeah, that is a very important and sort of continually growing area of focus and concern. So yeah, I can see highlighting, elevating that. Almost the transverse of that, which you all are probably familiar with, which is sort of being part of the civic engagement network, ecosystem, whatever you want to call it, is really about creating better user-centered processes and the sort of the technical piece of it, right? Or the design piece of it. The other end of that is the change management to get there. And sort of, sometimes we try and aim high to make these really big, giant leaps of faith and improvements, and sometimes we fall a little bit short. And so I would love if you guys could maybe share an example of where you were trying to make a change, or your organization, or you specifically, and you sort of weren't able to reach that full potential, and what you learned from that process, and what was sort of the insights for you. And maybe Sarah, we can start with you.
Yeah, I think it goes back to just the last discussion, which is building the trust. So for us, I mentioned at the top of the webinar about our candidate connection and getting candidates to give us information about themselves. Some are really happy to do so, but the problem we're trying to solve are the candidates who just aren't sure about how to acclimate to this more virtual environment, making sure that they trust us to provide the correct information. There's so much distrust of media and sourcing and everything like that happening from both sides right now, that one thing we're thinking about on a daily basis, and especially in my role, is how do we reach not just voters, but candidates directly so that they know we're here for them. We're simply just relaying the information about their campaigns and candidacies, and just making sure that they know, one, we're not robots. I hear that a lot. Oh my gosh, you have a human face and you're a real person. And then two, just making sure that they know that when they provide us information, that they'll trust us to use it in a credible, reliable way.
Yeah. Jill, what sort of comes to mind for you in this space?
Yeah, well, I would +1 to the idea of building trust by, clarifying that I'm not a robot. That can be helpful. We building trust has been a huge part of our mission as well. I think one other thing I think about, and one thing that Democracy Works has more recently been reckoning with, is the fact that our democracy has historically failed Black lives. And I think far too much of our organization and maybe our space's work has been carried out without significant or sufficient reckoning with that reality. And so, we're trying to be mindful of that and make really intentional changes to the way that we're working, because if we attempt to improve our democracy without that reckoning with the racism embedded in our institutions, embedded in our ways of life, we risk perpetuating the centuries of Black harm, or of harm to Black lives, rather. And so one way Democracy Works specifically is working to address that is with a full organizational analysis carried out by an organization called AORTA. I'm going to try and get that acronym right, the Anti-Oppression Resource and Training Alliance. And we know there's a lot more that we can do, but that review will really help us guide our ongoing work. So with regard to what have you learned, we're still learning, and we're going to keep doing that. But that's one thing that Democracy Works has been reckoning with more recently.
Yeah, that is, I'm sure, something that most of organizations across the board are starting to think more thoughtfully about. And thank you for sharing that example with us. Veronica, you're sort of in a slightly different space, but what are some of the learnings or insights that you've had in moments where you've tried to make that change and maybe not reach the full goal?
Yeah, sure. I think it's less of a specific example, but more of just a systematic way of needing to really partner with government to make changes to help government services become more accessible to folks. And with technology and with change, these are two areas that have not necessarily always been government's strong point. And so we find a lot through our work with our programs and also through the work of Brigade chapters every day that they are trying to make relationships within government and to be able to essentially needing to convince government that this, new technological way is a way that we can really help improve access to government services. And so really being able to kind of break down some of those barriers around process and the way that the procurement system works, and the traditional kind of barriers that come up within the government system are constant challenges. And so we really have adopted a framework of showing what's possible and then trying to help government see that these ways can actually improve both the way that folks access government services, but also make it easier on government's end to be able to provide these services, and also do it at a lesser cost. So these are all kind of ways in which we feel like we are able to better our communities, but trying to get through some of the systems that have existed for a really long time can be difficult.
Yeah, and the thread that you've all sort of shared is the building trust piece, regardless of where you are and what the partner is. Overcoming some of those initial challenges really does begin with A, transparency, and B, beginning trust. And I think that you've all shared some really illustrative examples of how you're doing that, right? And so hopefully folks that are here can relate to that or find some new approaches there too. And I'm sure that the panelists would be happy to share more. Shifting gears just slightly, this is an all women's panel. You all are leaders who happen to be women in organizations that are founded by women. And so you have a very unique perspective. I'm curious to know, what are you seeing in your organization that is being done now or has been to continue to bring more diverse voices to the forefront? What does that look like, and how does that sort of work for all of your various organizations? And maybe Sarah, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in this response, the keyword would be accessibility. So both voters and on the candidate side, having that information so that anybody sitting at home, especially now with mail-in balloting becoming so prominent, can sit at home and use a free resource to figure out what's on their ballot. And I think just lowering that barrier and Turbo Vote's doing it on the side of the voter registration and how to vote and that information, and then empowering those new voters to this cycle to feel like they're knowledgeable and can go ahead and vote. So I think just lowering all of those barriers to entry. And then on the candidate side, providing information about what it takes to run for your local state legislative office? How many signatures do you need? What does it take to get a referenda on the ballot in Wisconsin? That kind of information allows for citizens to feel like they can more directly connect with what's happening in their local democracy, local governments, et cetera. So I think that accessibility component, just bringing in that perspective really helps to let everybody engage.
Yeah. Jill, how does that look, what does that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I'd echo everything Sarah said about reducing those barriers. I think also internally, when it comes to bringing more diverse to the forefront at Democracy Works, we've grown so much in the time that I've been here. I started in January of 2016 when we had fewer than 20 people on staff, and now we're over 70 people. And so just in the last year, it's been 25% growth of employees. And so redesigning our hiring process to be to reduce implicit bias and focus on job skills has been really, really helpful. We added a position called Director of Inclusion and Engagement, which is filled by my fabulous colleague, Mariah Minigan. And in addition to leading our diversity, equity, and inclusion work and overseeing that hiring process, we also conduct regular trainings, and a lot of that work that I was talking about with the organizational analysis previously, is going on there. But we do trainings about conflict resolution, racial justice, disability justice, and as we've grown, we focused a lot on the shared agreement of stepping up and stepping back in all of our larger meetings. In this practice means that folks in leadership positions or who are regularly in like strategic and decision-making meetings yield the floor to give space to other voices. And so that's been really important. But I think, really intentionally building an organizational culture and organizational values that prioritize different diverse voices in our organization has helped us bring important perspectives into the process of building our technology, because that accessibility point that Sarah was making is a really important one. And if our technology isn't being built by the people that look like the country, it won't be accessible to everyone. And so, that's what I've seen at the Democracy Works level.
Yeah, making spaces is a huge piece of that, and it's a really interesting point that you bring up. Veronica, what does that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think that's a good point that Jill brings up around representation within our organizations. And one of the things that we focused on a lot at Code for America, because of the programs that we work in criminal justice and the social safety net and various other aspects of government, that folks that receive either services or are impacted by the criminal justice system are disproportionately people of color and Black and brown folks because of the systemic racism that has plagued our country since its inception. And so we really take an approach of taking seriously the need to have a diverse set of folks that are working on the issues that we work on. So I'm actually the chair of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee at Code for America, and we take several steps to do this in our hiring processes, and also the way that we incorporate inclusion after the hiring process into our processes within the organization. And we have made progress by the fact that we're now an organization that is 50% people of color, and we are looking to increase that, particularly, like I mentioned, because of the areas that we work in. We need to make sure that we have the representation of folks in a broad sense, so that we can really equitably produce products that are serving users and their needs in an effective way. And so I think that it really is twofold. So basically the way that we are building the tools that we are building, and then also the internal aspect of who makes up our organization. I think it's also worth mentioning that we are a nonprofit, but we are in the tech space, which is has had a lot of issues with representation and diversity. And so we seek to become leaders in the space, really, with the policies that we have in place and the measures that we take to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you for sharing that, Veronica, and for being in that role. It's really interesting now. I think in this time, everyone's being more reflective, and sometimes just getting an insider's view, right, for how every different entity is approaching it can be very helpful to help you think about the work that you're all going to do in your own space. And my last question for the panel before we open it up into Q&A, I noticed when folks signed on, there's a lot of folks that were either in the tech space or the nonprofit space or sort of right in between, who may be daydreaming about civic tech and what that would look like for them if they were to create something. And so what advice would you have for someone who's interested in either getting a role in the civic tech space or even creating something? What would be sort of your elevator, advice for them? And maybe we can start with Jill.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say maybe don't assume there's already a solution to a problem that your community is facing. I think, our co-founders, Seth and Katie, when they were first discussing the idea of TurboVote, Katie's kind of question was, how does this not already exist? And it was sort of like that realization of, this is such a clear problem, there should already be a solution to it. So, definitely if you are seeing a problem in your community, think about, and you think of a creative solution, don't assume it already exists. And then my other piece of advice would just be to bring your whole self to the work. Like I was saying earlier, our ability to create an inclusive, accessible civic tech space and to make our work inclusive and accessible depends on the diversity of perspectives that we have doing this work. And so the more we can create space for people to bring their whole selves, the closer we'll get to creating that truly inclusive space. And you don't have to be a software engineer to get involved in the civic tech space either. So.
Yeah, not at all, actually. Sarah.
Yeah, I was a political rhetoric major in college. So first, my parents weren't sure that I would ever find employment. But two, yes, you do not need to be an engineer or know anything about computers for that matter to get involved. One thing I would encourage if you're thinking about something new to build, in addition to if you want to work for an existing civic tech organization, if you are looking for something new to contribute to this field, go through the pain points as you go to vote this year. Where is it hard to find information about something? What part of the process was especially difficult to navigate? And think through that side of it as you're going through all the civic motions, and then see what the answer is that you get to that question. Where is it painful to become engaged? And in that answer, you might find a place to get involved. So that would be my encouragement there. But yeah, I mean, everybody in the space is always looking for, it's an all hands on deck endeavor. So anything you can contribute is welcomed, whether it's me who just can talk for a living versus somebody on our tech team who can actually do the day-to-day working in the data and making sure that our feeds are working. There's a space for everybody. So think through what it looks like for you and where you can contribute.
Yeah, that's an important point. I'm in government, and so we know silos very well, but we often share similar advice, which is don't build your tech in a silo, right? That the engagement piece is really important. Veronica.
Yeah, so I like to answer this question like with very kind of tangible aspects, whether it's in the political space or the civic tech spaces. Like both of those spaces, can be very exciting. But the reality is that both of these spaces are really made up of people that work in specific departments. And so really becoming kind of a choosing your path of what it is that you want to do. So whether it is being a technologist, whether that is in the marketing department or the operations department or the the engagement department. All of our organizations and political campaigns are made up of various departments. So it's less about actually working in the field. Of course, that is the field that you engage in with your specific role, but the more important thing is to be able to have skills in a specific area that can contribute to the space. So I would look at various organizations that might be organizations that you could potentially want to work in, see what departments are in those spaces or in those organizations, and then really kind of use your skills to become proficient and then, you know, a master in a specific department, because those are what these organizations are comprised of.
Great. Well, thank you all for sharing such thoughtful insights and ideas and just conversations with us. I am going to now turn it over to the audience and the Q&A panel, which I think Nicole is going to help us with.
Yes, let's turn to this first question here. Let's see. Okay, let's take this question. How do you build trust with your users? There is a lot of suspicion out there, which might be a real barrier to your work.
Great question. I think all of them probably have an interesting sort of viewpoint on that. Maybe we can start with Sarah, if that's okay, and then everyone else can join in.
Yeah, so for us, it starts super granular. We all can read an article from a nameless outlet and pretty quickly determine what the viewpoint of the author is. So for us, that was something that we focus on every day, looking at every word that we're putting into our database, every single sentence that gets written. How will one side view this versus another? Because the only way you're going to get audiences to connect and trust neutral information is if you're thinking through those specific questions. You know, we might accept that super PAC money is called dark money, but does that immediately turn off one side of the political spectrum? It's questions we need to be asking. And many of us have very large blind spots when it comes to that. You don't want to immediately turn off half of your potential audience, especially if your goal is to get factual, neutral information out there. So really thinking through every minute detail of the facts that you provide. Why are we choosing a certain sentence in a certain placement on a certain part of the article? These are conversations that we have on an hourly basis, and that's the important part. And then, like I said earlier, just letting everybody know that here's how our processes work. Here's how we're keeping the information fresh. Here's why you can trust us. We are behind the computers working on this every day and thinking through these questions.
Yeah, from that I'm hearing, you know, being thoughtful and transparent, right, in the processes. Veronica, how would you answer this question about building trust?
Yeah, I think that those are really good points. I would just emphasize the transparency process, and as part of that, specifically in the work that we do, the aspects of building our tools with the folks that are going to be using them, or the folks that have been affected by the spaces in which we're looking to have an impact. You know, instead of coming from an approach of just building something because you think it's going to work, and instead making sure that the whole process is inclusive of the folks that are going to be using it and the folks that have been experiencing whatever problem it is that you're looking to solve. It's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jill?
Yeah, I'll keep mine short and sweet because Veronica and Sarah both made really great points. The way we build trust with our users is just make sure our tech does what we say it does. You know, accuracy of the data, timeliness of the data, you know, just make it work well. And it can be difficult to run a national tool for voter registration and voter assistance with the different nuances at the state and local level. So yeah, just do the thing.
Great. Thank you, Jill, Sarah, and Veronica. Thank you all for those really insightful sort of approaches to building trust. It is the hardest thing. And I think we are almost at time now. So I'm going to check in with Nicole, but also just want to thank everyone for spending some time with us this afternoon.
Yes, thank you. We are at time. I know we could keep going on. We had some more good questions. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of them, but appreciate everyone participating and being here with us. So just the last point is if you could please take some time to complete our post-webinar survey. We'll include that in the chat. And we will also make sure, actually, when you exit out of Zoom, you'll be redirected to this link as well. So we'll provide you a couple avenues to get there. And I'll let you close it out, Dee.
Well, I think I would just encourage everyone to check out these incredible organizations that were shared today and think about, if you don't see something in this space, there's some really good advice shared today. And if you want to enter the space, there's also some really good advice shared today. So maybe my parting word would be just think about how you might want to be activated in this space, because there is a lot of opportunity and a lot of room, and we need more voices at the table. And so if you can bring yours in, you will help amplify some really important work. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Stay safe.